It was just another lecture, or so Ariel thought. She had barely made it through the doors of the Ivy Ridge Lecture Hall when the clock struck the hour, and Professor Marcus Ellsworth, a man with a reputation for his icy demeanor, slammed his textbook on the podium. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get straight to the point. You're here to challenge your minds, and I expect nothing less than perfection." Ariel Jackson, fresh from the dusty streets of Atlanta, sat quietly near the back of the room. She had tried, unsuccessfully, to blend in. But the towering white walls of Ivy Ridge, with their polished floors and ivy-covered brickwork, made her feel small. The students around her seemed to glide through life, their designer clothes and privileged air signaling a world that felt foreign to her. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The cool air in the room did nothing to ease the butterflies in her stomach. This was her first real test, not just academically, but socially. The quiet girl from a modest background, trying to make her mark at a place that seemed to breed elitism. Professor Ellsworth scanned the room. His eyes paused on Ariel for just a moment, a brief, almost dismissive glance. A flicker of recognition perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He picked up the marker, turned to the whiteboard, and began scribbling an equation that, at first glance, appeared to be written in an alien language. Ariel's pulse quickened. He's testing us. Right now. This very moment. The classroom went silent. Ellsworth's chalk screeched against the board, his hands steady and sure as he wrote a series of variables and integrals that made her mind race. It was calculus, at its most complex, the kind of problems she had solved in the quiet corners of Atlanta's public library, but here, under the glaring fluorescent lights of Ivy Ridge, the pressure felt different. Solve for X, the familiar challenge began to form in her mind. But this wasn't just any problem. Ariel's gaze flicked across the room as students began to scribble feverishly in their notebooks, their pens moving so fast they looked like blurs. But Ariel sat still. She wasn't intimidated. Not by the math. Not by Ellsworth's imposing presence. But by the unspoken truth that she wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. Her fingers twitched, her mind humming with the rhythm of the equations. She raised her hand. Yes. Ellsworth's voice sliced through the silence, his tone skeptical. I can solve it, Ariel said, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. A murmur rippled through the room. It was rare for anyone, especially a freshman, to speak up in Ellsworth's class, much less challenge him. Ariel wasn't even sure if the rest of the class knew who she was. To them, she was just another girl in a hoodie, trying to fit into a world where everyone else seemed so much more polished. Ellsworth raised an eyebrow. Oh. And how do you propose to do that, Miss Jackson, she replied. Ariel Jackson. Miss Jackson, then. I hope you're prepared to back up your claim. The problem on the board isn't for the faint of heart. He motioned to the complex equation, then stepped aside to give her the floor. The room held its breath. Ariel stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She walked to the front of the class, feeling every eye on her. The chalk in her hand felt heavier than it ever had before. She took a deep breath and glanced once more at the equation. It was just a series of variables, but to anyone else, it might have seemed like an insurmountable challenge. I can do this, she thought, steadying her breath. With a few swift strokes of the chalk, she began breaking the problem down. Her mind clicked into gear, as it always did when she solved math. The numbers flowed like a familiar song, each step precise, each equation logical. She had been here before. It was like an instinct. The steps were simple to her, though perhaps not to anyone else. She could hear the low murmurs behind her. Some students sounded impressed, while others simply didn't believe it was possible. Ariel ignored them. She had been underestimated her whole life. She wasn't about to let that happen now. Her chalk paused mid-equation. There was a single moment of doubt, a fleeting thought that maybe she had missed something, some detail. But then she erased the mistake and started again. She finished the problem in record time, steps unfolding seamlessly as she wrapped up the final solution. "Done," she said simply, stepping back from the board. The room fell silent. For a moment, there was only the hum of the fluorescent lights above, buzzing in the tension-filled space. Ellsworth didn't speak immediately. He stood there, eyes fixed on the board, scanning her work. The class was waiting. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Finally, Ellsworth spoke. "Beginner's luck," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "That's all it is. Let's move on." Ariel blinked, stunned. Her pulse raced. She had expected something. Perhaps a compliment, a nod of acknowledgement, but instead, he dismissed her like she was just another student who got lucky. The class slowly returned to their scribbling, but Ariel's heart wasn't in it anymore. She had done it, and yet, it felt like her success didn't matter. She had proven herself in front of everyone, but for some reason, she felt smaller than ever. She returned to her seat, her chest heavy, as though the weight of the entire room had fallen on her. There was a bitter taste in the back of her mouth. Was this it? Was this how they would always see her? Like she was nothing more than a freak anomaly, a fluke in a world of elite minds? But there was something else, too. Something that pushed against the weight of his words. Hope. This wasn't over. She knew it. Ellsworth's words didn't define her. What she had just done, that was hers. As the class continued, Ariel sat quietly, her mind racing. She had survived this moment, but what would the next one bring? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ariel Jackson wasn't the kind of person who felt at home in places like Ivy Ridge. Not because she wasn't smart enough, quite the opposite, but because everything about this place felt like an endless reminder that she wasn't supposed to be here. She had known from the beginning that the odds were stacked against her. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Ariel's life had always been a balancing act. Her mother, Lena Jackson, worked double shifts as a nurse, doing everything she could to keep food on the table for Ariel and her younger brother, Tyrell. Despite their struggles, Lena had always insisted that Ariel could be anything she wanted, even when the world seemed to tell her otherwise. "You gotta be twice as good to get half as far, baby," Lena would say, her words steady with the weight of experience. "But you can do it. I know you can." Ariel had taken those words to heart. The thing about growing up in a tough neighborhood, in a single-parent household, was that you learned to fight for everything you wanted. And Ariel had fought her entire life. Fought for her place in the school system, fought against the people who thought she didn't belong, and fought to make her mom proud. She remembered the first time she fell in love with math. It was in Mrs. Garrett's 7th grade class, when they were learning algebra. While most of her classmates struggled with the concepts, Ariel understood the patterns instinctively. The equations made sense in a way that nothing else ever had. She would spend hours after school in the library, devouring math books, going over the lessons again and again, trying to outpace the rest of the class. And she did. By high school, Ariel had become a math prodigy in her own right. She had won every regional math competition and earned a full scholarship to Ivy Ridge, a prestigious school many of her classmates had only dreamed about. But no matter how many awards she earned, no matter how many times she solved complex equations that made other students freeze, Ariel could never shake the feeling that she didn't belong. On the day she left Atlanta for Ivy Ridge, Lena had packed her daughter's suitcase with more than just clothes and books. She packed her pride, her hopes, and a deep belief that Ariel could change the world. "Don't you forget where you came from, Ariel," Lena had said, holding her daughter tight in the doorway of their small apartment. "But don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve this. You've worked hard for it." "I won't, Mom," Ariel had promised, hugging her back. "I'll make you proud." But as the bus drove her away from her family, Ariel couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake. Ivy Ridge, with its grand Gothic architecture and manicured lawns, looked nothing like the world she had grown up in. The students here weren't just rich, they were heirs to legacies, bound by centuries-old traditions and a social hierarchy that Ariel had never even considered before. Ariel's first few weeks at Ivy Ridge had been a blur of isolation. She was placed in a dormitory with 3 other students, Megan, Clara, and Nina, all of whom came from affluent families. The girls were friendly enough at first, but Ariel quickly realized they weren't interested in becoming her friends. Megan talked about her vacations in Europe, Clara bragged about her private tutors, and Nina wore clothes Ariel had only ever seen in magazines. When she spoke, Ariel felt out of place. The conversations felt foreign to her, as if the students were speaking a different language, one that had nothing to do with the streets of Atlanta or the challenges her family had faced. She had never been invited to study sessions, never been included in weekend outings. It was as though her very presence in their world was an inconvenience. Despite the loneliness, Ariel focused on her studies. She threw herself into her work, spending late nights in the library, immersing herself in advanced calculus and theorems. It was the one place where she felt in control, the one place where the world didn't matter, and where numbers and variables made perfect sense. But there were always moments, small moments, that reminded her she wasn't quite part of the Ivy Ridge elite. In the dining hall, she would sit alone, eating quietly as she watched her classmates chat and laugh in their cliques. She couldn't help but notice how their conversations always seemed to center around their vacations, internships, and connections in high places. It was like they were all playing a game she didn't know the rules to. One morning, a few weeks into the semester, Ariel decided to attend office hours for the first time. She had questions about a particularly tricky differential equation that had been bothering her for days. She walked across the campus, her steps echoing in the empty hallways, trying to ignore the weight of the unfamiliar world around her. When she reached Professor Ellsworth's office, she knocked softly on the door. "Come in," a voice called from inside. Ariel hesitated for a moment before entering. Professor Ellsworth was sitting at his desk, papers scattered around him as he sipped his coffee. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a moment, they were cold, like he didn't quite know what to make of her. "Professor Ellsworth, I had a question about the last lecture," she said, her voice quiet but steady. He nodded, motioning to the chair across from him. "Go ahead." As Ariel began to explain the problem, she felt a flicker of hope. She was used to speaking in front of teachers, used to solving problems that no one else could. She thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe Ellsworth would see her for what she truly was, not just a student, but someone who had the potential to change the world of mathematics. But as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze was still cold, almost dismissive. "Miss Jackson," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence, "this is a graduate-level problem. You should focus on your coursework before attempting something beyond your level." His voice was dismissive, as if he was humoring her. Ariel's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. She nodded and stood up. "Thank you, Professor," she said, though the words felt hollow. She left his office, feeling the familiar weight of doubt press down on her. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, and it wouldn't be the last. But she had learned long ago that being underestimated wasn't something to be angry about. It was an opportunity. A chance to prove them wrong. And prove them wrong, she would. As Ariel walked back to her dorm, the sky was painted with the colors of the setting sun. She didn't have the luxury of feeling sorry for herself. There was work to be done, and she would do it, just like always. She would show them. She didn't know how, and she didn't know when. But she would. It was the second month of the semester when Ariel Jackson first felt the true weight of the challenge she had unknowingly signed up for. The pressure had been mounting since that first day when she dared to speak up in Professor Ellsworth's class, but now, as midterms loomed on the horizon, the stakes had never felt higher. She sat at her usual spot in the corner of the library, buried beneath a mountain of calculus textbooks and notebooks filled with scribbled equations. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her hands trembled slightly from the hours of relentless studying. It was the same every day now: wake up, go to class, study in the library until closing, return to her dorm to catch a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. She had made herself invisible, focusing only on the numbers that made sense to her, but even the library, with its towering shelves and hushed silence, felt like another world. "Excuse me, Miss Jackson." A voice broke through her concentration, and Ariel looked up, startled. It was Megan, one of the girls from her dorm. Megan had always been polite but distant, never truly making an effort to include Ariel in their social circles. But there was something different in her tone this time. There was a nervousness there that Ariel couldn't quite place. "Hi, Megan," Ariel said, trying to mask the surprise in her voice. "Is everything okay?" Megan shifted uneasily, glancing around before she lowered her voice. I need some help with the midterm prep. I know this sounds weird, but I heard you're really good with math." Ariel blinked, taken aback. Good with math? That was an understatement. But she'd never expected anyone from her dorm to ask for her help, certainly not Megan, who had spent the past month talking about charity galas and summer vacations in Saint-Tropez. "Well, yeah, I could help," Ariel said cautiously, pushing her notes aside and sitting up a little straighter. "What do you need help with?" Megan hesitated. I'm just not getting some of the stuff in Professor Ellsworth's class. You know, the whole integration by parts thing and some of the partial fractions. I tried studying with Clara and Nina, but they just don't get it." Ariel nodded, her fingers twitching as she scanned her books. It wasn't uncommon for the privileged students to struggle with advanced calculus, but it was hard to suppress a slight sense of frustration. This was the very same calculus that Ariel had mastered back in high school, long before coming to Ivy Ridge. "I can help with that," Ariel said, trying to sound calm. "Integration by parts isn't too bad once you get the hang of it." Megan smiled, relief washing over her face. "Thanks, Ariel. I really appreciate it." As Megan sat down next to her, Ariel couldn't help but wonder, what's going on? Why now? The next few days were a blur of study sessions. Megan, Clara, and Nina had all started showing up at the library, one by one, asking for Ariel's help with calculus. At first, it seemed like a good thing: she was finally being noticed, even if it was for her brain rather than her social status. But as the sessions continued, Ariel began to notice something strange. Megan, who had always been dismissive of Ariel's background, started to seem almost too eager. Clara and Nina, though initially skeptical, followed Megan's lead, nodding along as Ariel explained difficult concepts. But something about the way they spoke, their tone, their words, began to nag at Ariel. "I don't know how you do it, Ariel," Megan said one afternoon, glancing up from her notes. "You're so good at this. I can barely keep up with all these formulas and rules, but you make it seem so easy." "Thanks," Ariel muttered, but the compliment felt hollow. There was something in Megan's voice that made her skin crawl. It wasn't genuine admiration, it was condescending. "Yeah, I wish I had your brains," Nina chimed in, a little too enthusiastically. "I mean, I just don't get how someone can be so natural at math. You must have been studying it your whole life." Ariel stiffened. "I mean, I did spend a lot of time studying," she said slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. "But it's not that hard once you break it down." Clara leaned in. "You know, you should really think about helping other students with this. I'm sure the math department would pay you for tutoring." Ariel's pulse quickened, but she didn't let it show. She was used to people trying to use her talents for their own benefit. The reminder of how quickly they shifted from "please help" to "we can use this" felt like a slap in the face. But she couldn't deny the truth: it was easy to see why they might think she was a natural. What they didn't know was that for Ariel, math wasn't just a gift, it was an escape. It was a language she spoke fluently in a world that often left her feeling lost. "Maybe," Ariel said, her voice distant as she closed her calculus book, signaling that the study session was over. "I'll think about it." As the group dispersed, Ariel sat back in her chair, watching them leave. The weight of her thoughts pressed down on her like a 1,000-pound boulder. Why does it always feel like I'm being used? Her mind raced. The more she helped, the more they seemed to want from her, never really seeing her for who she was, just for what she could do. It's always the same. I'm just a tool to them. A means to an end. And then, just when she thought the day was over, a familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Jackson. We need to talk." Ariel looked up to see Professor Ellsworth standing in the doorway of the library, his face a mix of cold disapproval and curiosity. His sharp eyes bored into hers, as if she were an equation he was determined to solve. Ariel swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. The last thing she needed right now was another lecture from him. But something in his expression, something sharp and calculating, told her that this conversation would be different from all the others. "What is it, Professor?" she asked, her voice cool but nervous. "Not here," Ellsworth said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come with me. Now." Ariel's stomach tightened as she stood up, her heart racing in her chest. Something was coming, something she wasn't prepared for. As she followed him out of the library and into the dimly lit hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that her entire world was about to be turned upside down. Ariel followed Professor Ellsworth down the quiet corridor, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing above them, casting long shadows on the walls. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her thoughts racing. What did he want? She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a casual conversation. Something about the professor's cold, calculating demeanor told her that this would be a turning point. They reached a small office at the end of the hall. Ellsworth didn't knock, he simply opened the door and stepped inside. Ariel hesitated for a moment, the doorframe feeling like the boundary between her current reality and whatever was about to unfold. She took a deep breath and followed him in. The office was sparse, with nothing more than a desk, a few chairs, and bookshelves filled with academic journals. Ellsworth motioned for her to sit, his voice stern but controlled. "Sit down, Miss Jackson. We need to talk." Ariel sat across from him, her mind whirling. She'd been preparing for a confrontation of some kind, but this? She wasn't sure what to expect. She clasped her hands together on her lap, trying to calm the rising tide of anxiety. "I've been hearing some interesting things, Ariel," Ellsworth began, leaning back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "You've been helping several of your peers with their math problems. Megan, Clara, Nina. They all seem to be very impressed by your abilities." Ariel stiffened. She had expected something along these lines, but hearing it from Ellsworth's lips made it feel more ominous. "I'm just helping them with their studies." "It's no big deal," she said, keeping her voice steady. Ellsworth raised an eyebrow. "No big deal. You're tutoring them on problems that are considered advanced graduate material. And from what I've heard, you're doing it with a level of ease that's unusual for someone at your level." Ariel felt the tension between them build. She had always known that being good at math could be a double-edged sword, but this was different. "I've worked hard," she said carefully. "I've always worked hard." Ellsworth nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sure you have. But here's the thing, Miss Jackson, this isn't just about math. You've been playing a game, and I'm not sure you understand the rules." Ariel's stomach flipped. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "You see, Ivy Ridge is about more than just academic excellence. It's about connections, about fitting in with the right circles. It's about understanding the way things work behind closed doors." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And right now, it looks like you're playing a game that you don't fully understand. You're helping students, sure, but what are they helping you with in return?" Ariel's heart skipped a beat. "Helping me with in return?" She had always assumed they were just trying to keep up, that her help was purely academic. But hearing Ellsworth say it like that, it felt wrong. "I'm not asking for anything in return," Ariel said, her voice colder now, defensive. "I'm just helping my classmates with something I understand." Ellsworth smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was thin, almost predatory. "Oh, I'm sure that's what you think. But that's not how things work here. At Ivy Ridge, you don't get ahead by being a good Samaritan. You get ahead by aligning yourself with the right people. People who can make things happen for you." Ariel felt a rush of anger mixed with confusion. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice rising despite herself. "Are you accusing me of something?" Ellsworth's smile faded, and he leaned even closer. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Miss Jackson. I'm simply pointing out that your talents are not as invisible as you might think. I've been watching you. You're too good to be ignored, but you don't seem to realize the power you have. And let me tell you, in a place like this, power is everything." Ariel's pulse quickened. This conversation had taken a turn she wasn't prepared for. "Power? I don't care about power. I just want to succeed." Ellsworth stood up abruptly, walking to the window and staring out at the campus below. "Success, in this place, comes at a price. People like you, who think they can just skate by, get caught up in the game whether they want to or not." He turned back to her, his eyes cold. "And if you're not careful, Ariel, you might find yourself used. Or worse, made an example of." Ariel felt her throat tighten. An example of? The warning was clear now, but it was too late to back out. She had already become entangled in something she didn't fully understand. "I don't need your advice, Professor," she said, standing up slowly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "I'm just here to learn. I don't care about your game." Ellsworth's lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts, Miss Jackson. I'm sure you'll change your mind once the pressure starts to mount." Ariel turned on her heel and walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her. Her mind was reeling. Power? Pressure? What kind of game was he talking about? But one thing was certain, she had just been warned, and not in a way that made her feel safe. As she stepped back into the hallway, she could feel the weight of Ivy Ridge pressing down on her. This wasn't just a school. It was a place where the rules were unwritten, and only the ones willing to play by those rules could survive. Ariel's footsteps were fast, her heart racing as she headed back to the library. She didn't want to think about Ellsworth's words, but they clung to her like a shadow, following her every move. Later that evening, as she sat at her desk, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, Ariel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was about to happen. Something big. Her mind kept drifting back to the look in Ellsworth's eyes, to the cold way he'd spoken to her. And then there was the matter of her classmates, the ones who'd been so impressed by her abilities. What did they really want from her? Was this whole thing just a setup? Was she just a pawn in someone else's game? She didn't know the answers. But she was about to find out. Ariel leaned forward, scribbling a few notes on her page. There was one thing she was certain of, she would not be used. She wouldn't let them control her. She would play their game, but on her own terms. The storm was coming, and Ariel Jackson was ready to face it. The days following her meeting with Professor Ellsworth felt like a fog had descended over Ariel. She couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of tension, as if she were a puppet in a game she didn't know how to play. Every encounter with her classmates felt charged now, as if she were being scrutinized under a magnifying glass. And all the while, the weight of her responsibilities kept pressing on her, both in the classroom and outside it. Ariel kept to herself more and more, withdrawing into her studies. The library became her safe haven, the only place where she could escape the constant undercurrent of suspicion and expectation that seemed to follow her everywhere. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on her work, the nagging feeling of being watched, of being manipulated, never left her. Then came the email. It was a Friday morning when Ariel opened her inbox to find an unexpected message from Professor Ellsworth. The subject line read simply, "Important meeting, please respond." Her stomach tightened as she clicked open the email. There was no greeting, no formalities, just a few lines of text. "Meet me in my office at 3 p.m. today. I have something important to discuss with you. Please be prompt. Professor Ellsworth." Her first instinct was to ignore it. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to get tangled up in whatever game he was playing. But as much as she tried to ignore the feeling of dread swirling in her gut, she knew she couldn't just let it go. She had to know what he wanted, what this was all about. By 3 p.m., Ariel was standing outside Professor Ellsworth's office again, her heart racing in her chest. This time, she didn't wait for him to call her in. She knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway, and opened the door before he could respond. Ellsworth looked up from his desk, his sharp features softened only slightly by the flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Ah, Miss Jackson. Please, come in." Ariel stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room quickly. The same cold, sterile atmosphere hung in the air, nothing had changed. The same bookshelves, the same desk, the same unsettling sense of control. Ellsworth motioned to the chair across from him, but Ariel didn't sit. She stood, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. "I received your email," she said, her voice steady but laced with a hint of defiance. "What is it you want, Professor?" Ellsworth leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Straight to the point, I see. Good. I like that." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "Miss Jackson, I've been keeping a close eye on you these past few weeks. And I must say, I'm impressed. Your abilities in mathematics are extraordinary, remarkable, even." Ariel's heart skipped a beat. Was this a trap? Was he trying to bait her into doing something? But Ellsworth wasn't done. "But talent like yours doesn't go unnoticed, and it doesn't go unchallenged. There are people here at Ivy Ridge who've been wondering just how far you're willing to go to prove yourself." Ariel's confusion deepened, but she refused to show it. "What do you mean? What people?" Ellsworth smiled thinly. "Oh, you don't know yet, do you? The faculty, the administration, they all know about you. The rumors have spread. You've caught their attention, and not just because you're good at math." Ariel's pulse quickened. The rumors? What was he talking about? He continued, his voice almost conspiratorial now. "They're watching you closely, Ariel. Some think you're too good for your own good. Some are impressed. Others? Well, others think it's time for you to show what you're really made of." Ariel's mind raced. This isn't just about math. This is about something bigger. She took a step forward, her voice sharp with frustration. "What are you trying to say, Professor? What do you want from me?" Ellsworth's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "You see, Miss Jackson, at Ivy Ridge, it's not just about doing well in class. It's about power, influence, and connections. And you, my dear, are in the perfect position to make a name for yourself. You're a black student at an elite institution. You've got the brains, the skills, and, most importantly, you've got something they want." Ariel's stomach turned. She had a sinking feeling where this was going. She had heard about these kinds of games, but she never imagined being caught in the middle of them. Ellsworth leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "You can help us, Ariel. Help us build the connections, the networks that will propel this institution into the future. Or you can stand by and watch as others use you for their own gain." Ariel's breath hitched. It was clear now. He wasn't just speaking to her as a student, he was trying to make her a pawn in a larger game. A game where power and status ruled above all else. I don't want anything to do with this, Ariel said, her voice trembling with anger but firm nonetheless. I'm not a tool for you or anyone else to use. I'm here to learn, to make a difference on my own terms. Ellsworth's expression darkened. You'll learn, Miss Jackson. You'll learn exactly what happens when someone like you refuses to play the game. I warned you before, this place will chew you up if you let it. And you, my dear, are making yourself a target. Ariel could feel the weight of his words, but she refused to let them break her. I'll make my own way. I don't need you or anyone else telling me what I can or can't do. Ellsworth's smile returned, but it was crueler this time, like he was enjoying the power he held over her. We'll see how long that attitude lasts, won't we? The words hung in the air as he stood up and walked around the desk, his presence looming over her. Ariel didn't move. She stood her ground, refusing to let fear or intimidation control her. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, the door slamming shut behind her. Her mind was spinning, her heart racing with adrenaline. What had just happened? Ellsworth had made his intentions clear, but something about his words, it was like a warning, a challenge. But Ariel wasn't about to back down. She had come this far, and no matter how much they tried to manipulate her, she wasn't going to let them win. As she made her way through the hallways of Ivy Ridge, the weight of what she'd just learned began to settle over her like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about her education anymore. It was about survival. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Ivy Ridge, Ariel Jackson felt like she was truly in the fight of her life. Ariel had never been one to back down. Her mother had always told her, the world doesn't hand out respect, you earn it. And Ariel had taken those words to heart. As she walked out of Professor Ellsworth's office that day, her mind was a swirl of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, confusion, but most of all, a sense of determination. No matter what the stakes were, she would not let them use her. She wouldn't let Ivy Ridge or any of its powerful figures dictate her path. But as the days went on, the weight of the situation became more and more palpable. Ellsworth's warning echoed in her head constantly, this place will chew you up if you let it. There was a part of her that wanted to dismiss his words, after all, she was strong, capable, and had worked too hard to be taken down by anyone. But another part of her, the part that couldn't quite shake the feeling of being watched, was starting to feel the pressure. Ariel had always prided herself on her independence. She had come to Ivy Ridge with a singular goal, to prove to herself and the world that she was capable of achieving greatness. But now, standing on the precipice of something far darker than she could have imagined, she began to question everything. Was this the price of excellence? Was this what it meant to be exceptional in a place like Ivy Ridge? The campus had become a battleground, quiet and insidious, but a battleground nonetheless. She could feel the invisible walls closing in around her. Every hallway seemed to echo with the whispers of students who had their own agendas, their own alliances, their own games. And Professor Ellsworth was at the center of it all. But what truly unsettled Ariel was the way her classmates were starting to look at her, differently. She noticed it in their eyes, the subtle shifts in their behavior. Some of them were wary, as though they could sense the tension that clung to her like a shadow. Others, especially the ones she had helped with calculus, now seemed almost too eager to get close. It was as though they had all been placed on opposite sides of an invisible line, and Ariel was caught somewhere in between. Megan, Clara, and Nina, who had once been her study group, had started acting strangely around her. At first, it seemed harmless, just a shift in their usual dynamic. But as the days passed, Ariel couldn't help but notice the distance that was growing between them. Was it because of what Ellsworth had said? Or was it something deeper, something she couldn't yet understand? One afternoon, a few days after her conversation with Ellsworth, Megan stopped by Ariel's dorm room to chat. Ariel had been sitting at her desk, poring over her notes, when there was a knock on the door. She didn't expect to see Megan standing there, her expression hesitant, like she was unsure whether to enter. "Hey, Ariel," Megan greeted softly, stepping inside. Can we talk? Ariel raised an eyebrow. Of course. What's going on? Megan shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking down to the floor before meeting Ariel's gaze. It's about Professor Ellsworth. You know, what he said to you. Ariel's heart skipped a beat. She had been dreading this moment, the moment when her classmates would choose sides. She braced herself, trying not to let her emotions show. What about it? Megan hesitated before speaking. I just wanted to check in on you. I know he can be a bit intimidating, but it's just the way he operates, you know. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. Ariel's chest tightened. Was Megan trying to reassure her, or was she just saying the things she thought Ariel wanted to hear? Megan, she said slowly, what exactly are you trying to say? Megan sat down on the bed, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. I know that you're different, Ariel. You're not like the others. You're talented, and that's why Professor Ellsworth's been paying so much attention to you. He's trying to set you up for something big. You don't have to do it alone. We could help. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ariel couldn't ignore the undertone in Megan's voice. Was she offering support, or was this just another way of luring her into Ellsworth's game? I don't need anyone's help, Ariel said firmly, her voice tinged with both frustration and determination. I didn't come here to be part of any game. Megan's expression softened, but there was an undeniable shift in her eyes. She looked at Ariel for a long moment before standing up. I just thought you'd want to know. I don't want you to get hurt. Before Ariel could respond, Megan was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The door clicked shut behind Megan, and Ariel sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space in front of her. Her mind was racing, but she felt no closer to understanding the truth. Who could she trust? The people she had once considered her friends were starting to distance themselves, and the ones who had once looked at her with admiration now seemed to view her as a threat. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the campus was bathed in the fading light of dusk, Ariel stood at her window, looking out over the sprawling grounds of Ivy Ridge. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, the colors of a world that felt so far removed from the one she was now part of. She had always believed that if she worked hard enough, if she proved herself worthy, she could make it on her own. But now, that belief was being tested. She was standing at a crossroads. One path led deeper into the murky waters of Ivy Ridge's power games, and the other was a lonely, uncertain road where she might have to fight for every ounce of respect she earned. Ariel closed her eyes, her mind drifting back to the conversation with Ellsworth. Power. Influence. Connections. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, was there any way out? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was. Ariel was going to have to make a choice, soon. She couldn't stay stuck in the middle forever. She had to decide whether to play by their rules or walk away from everything she had worked so hard for. She took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling over her like a heavy cloak. This was bigger than just her education now. This was about who she was going to be. And who she was going to become. The decision Ariel faced was not an easy one. The weight of Ivy Ridge, its expectations, its politics, its hidden agendas, pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every move she made, every conversation she had, felt like she was navigating a minefield. But she had no choice. She couldn't turn back now. She had to figure out where her path would lead, and what it would cost her to walk it. The tension in the air was palpable as the weeks wore on. Ariel's encounters with Professor Ellsworth became more frequent, each one more unsettling than the last. Every time she walked into his office, there was an invisible barrier between them, something unspoken, a tension that lingered in the air long after the meeting was over. He had made it clear that he expected something from her, and though he had yet to be explicit about what it was, the message was unmistakable. She was being watched. Ariel tried to focus on her studies, but it became increasingly difficult. Every exam, every paper, felt like it was being scrutinized with a fine-tooth comb. The pressure was mounting. Her professors, her classmates, even the administration, they were all part of this web, and Ariel was caught right in the middle. It was becoming harder to differentiate between genuine support and manipulation, between those who truly wanted to help her and those who were trying to use her to further their own agendas. The breaking point came during a group study session with some of her peers. Ariel had been working tirelessly on her calculus problems, as usual. She had always been able to solve problems with ease, but recently, things felt different. The problems seemed to pile up in ways that made her question her own understanding. It wasn't that she didn't know the material, it was the constant pressure, the constant sense of being watched, that had started to cloud her focus. That day, as she worked with Megan, Clara, and Nina in the library, Ariel noticed something was off. Megan had been distant, almost as though she was avoiding looking directly at her. Clara kept checking her phone, while Nina's eyes flickered nervously between her notes and the door, like she was waiting for someone to walk in. Ariel felt a growing unease in her chest, like something was about to explode. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" Ariel asked, trying to break the silence. Megan didn't meet her gaze. Instead, she looked at the table and shrugged. "Yeah, we're just trying to keep up, you know. It's a lot of pressure with finals coming up." Ariel frowned. Something didn't add up. She knew Megan wasn't being entirely honest. There was more going on beneath the surface. Before she could push further, the door to the study room opened, and a figure stepped inside. It was Professor Ellsworth. Ariel's heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here? He looked around the room with a calculating gaze, his presence imposing. "Ah, Miss Jackson," he said, his voice smooth but with a slight edge. "I see you're working hard. Good. You'll need all the focus you can muster." Ariel's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Professor Ellsworth. What brings you to the library?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked slowly around the table, his eyes lingering on her classmates. There was something unnerving about the way he observed them, like he was sizing them up. "I've been hearing a lot of interesting things," Ellsworth said, finally turning his attention back to Ariel. "I hear you're quite the calculus genius. A rising star, some might say." Ariel clenched her jaw. She didn't need him to remind her of her skills, she already knew what she was capable of. But the way he said it, the way he implied something more sinister in his tone, sent a chill down her spine. "We were just working on the latest set of problems," Ariel said, trying to steer the conversation back to normalcy. "Everything's fine, Professor." Ellsworth smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. I'm sure you'll do well. But I hope you understand that success comes with a price. It's not just about being good at what you do. It's about knowing when to make the right alliances." Ariel felt a wave of nausea. She had been expecting him to say something like this. It was always about alliances with him, about making the right connections. What did he want from her now? "Just remember, Miss Jackson," Ellsworth continued, "I'm always watching. And I have a vested interest in seeing you succeed. But I also have a vested interest in seeing you know your place." He turned abruptly and walked toward the door, leaving the room in a heavy silence. Ariel stared after him, her mind reeling. Know your place. Was this some sort of twisted game? Was she just a pawn to him, another piece to be moved around in his elaborate chess match? Her classmates didn't speak at first. It was Clara who broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ariel, you should be careful. What he's saying, it's not just about the math. He's playing with you." Ariel turned to face Clara, her expression hardening. "I know." The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. It was as though the entire atmosphere had shifted, and Ariel suddenly felt more isolated than ever. Megan looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting back and forth as though unsure of where to place herself in the situation. Nina, too, seemed nervous, but there was something in her eyes, something that made Ariel feel like she was being abandoned by the very people who were supposed to be on her side. But it was what happened next that truly set the course for what would come. As the study session ended and everyone packed up their things, Megan finally spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "I know what you're thinking, Ariel," she said. "But you can't just fight him head-on. It's not that simple. Professor Ellsworth isn't just a teacher. He has power, and he's got connections. You don't want to make an enemy of him." Ariel's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to shout at Megan, to tell her that she didn't need anyone's permission to fight for what was right. But the words caught in her throat. Megan was right about one thing: Ellsworth was more than just a professor. He was a force in this institution, and he had the kind of influence that could ruin careers, change the course of lives. And yet, Ariel couldn't help but feel a surge of anger rise up inside her. She wasn't going to be intimidated. She wasn't going to back down. But the question remained, how could she fight back when the very system she was trying to survive in was stacked against her? As she walked back to her dorm that evening, the weight of her conversation with Megan still pressing on her mind, Ariel realized that her battle had just begun. There would be no easy answers, no clear path. But one thing was certain: she was not going to be another victim of this twisted game. She was going to fight. Ariel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into a world she didn't fully understand. The threat of Professor Ellsworth hung over her like a storm cloud, darkening her every thought. The pressure was unbearable, but she wasn't ready to give in, not yet. But as the days passed, it became clearer that the only way to survive was to find a way to navigate the murky waters of Ivy Ridge. The morning after her conversation with Megan, Ariel received a message that left her both intrigued and cautious. The text was simple, but its implications were far-reaching. "Meet me in the library tonight, 8 p.m. I have something important to discuss. Clara." Ariel stared at the phone screen for a long moment. Clara had been one of her closest friends at Ivy Ridge, at least, she had been. But things had changed since that day in the library when Ellsworth walked in. The dynamic between them had shifted, and Ariel wasn't sure if it was due to fear, manipulation, or something else. But Clara had always been trustworthy, hadn't she? Still, there was a sense of hesitation in Ariel. She knew that at Ivy Ridge, there were no simple meetings. Every conversation, every action, seemed to come with hidden motives. But something told her that this time, there was more at play. That evening, Ariel made her way to the library, her heart pounding in her chest. The campus was eerily quiet, the fading light casting long shadows on the pavement. She felt a growing sense of unease with every step she took, her mind racing through every possibility. Was Clara offering help, or was this some kind of trap? As she entered the library, she saw Clara sitting at a table near the back, surrounded by stacks of books. She looked up when Ariel approached, her expression serious but tinged with something else, something like urgency. "Ariel," Clara whispered, glancing around nervously before gesturing for her to sit down. "We need to talk. It's about Ellsworth." Ariel's stomach dropped. She had suspected as much. She pulled out the chair opposite Clara and sat down, leaning in slightly. "Go on," Ariel said, her voice steady, though her nerves were on edge. Clara took a deep breath. "Look, I've been talking to some of the other students, and things are a lot more complicated than we thought. Ellsworth doesn't just want you to do well. He wants to control you, all of us, actually. You're not the first person he's tried to manipulate, and you won't be the last." Ariel narrowed her eyes, trying to piece together what Clara was saying. "Control us? What do you mean?" Clara hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting nervously toward the door again before she continued. "There's a secret group here, students, faculty, even some alumni, who have been working together for years to ensure Ivy Ridge stays the way it is. It's all about power, influence, and making sure certain people rise to the top while others are left to fade into the background. Ariel's mind raced. A secret group. Had she stumbled upon something much bigger than she realized? She had always known Ivy Ridge was competitive, but this was something else entirely. So, what does this have to do with me? Ariel asked, her voice a little sharper than she intended. I'm not part of any group. I'm just trying to get through my classes and prove I belong here. Clara leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. You are part of the group, whether you know it or not. You're the one they've been watching. Your talent, your potential, it's too much to ignore. But they don't just want you to succeed, they want you to join them. To play their game. Ariel felt a wave of anger rising in her chest. You mean, they want me to be their pawn? To do whatever they say? Clara nodded solemnly. Exactly. And Ellsworth? He's the one who holds the strings. He's the one who decides who rises and who falls. And he's been grooming you for something much bigger than just calculus problems. He's been testing you, seeing if you can handle it. Ariel's mind spun. She had suspected there was more to Ellsworth than met the eye, but this? This was beyond anything she could have imagined. A secret group pulling the strings behind the scenes, manipulating students to keep their power intact. It was like something out of a thriller. So, what am I supposed to do now? Ariel asked, her voice tight with frustration. Clara looked around one last time before sliding a piece of paper across the table. This is an invitation. Someone else wants to meet with you. Someone who's not part of Ellsworth's group. They know what he's doing, and they want to help you. They can protect you from getting swept up in this whole mess. But you have to make a choice. The invitation's for tomorrow night. I think you should go. Ariel stared at the paper, her mind whirling. Who was this person? Was this another trap? Or was Clara genuinely trying to help her? What's the catch? Ariel asked, her eyes still on the paper. Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. There's always a catch, Ariel. But this is your only chance. You can't take on Ellsworth and his people by yourself. They're too powerful. You need to make allies, and fast. Ariel's hand shook as she picked up the paper. Her thoughts were a tangle of doubt and fear, but one thing was certain, she couldn't ignore this. The invitation might be the key to breaking free from the hold Ellsworth had on her and Ivy Ridge. Okay, Ariel said, her voice firm. I'll go. But I need to know one thing, Clara. Can I trust you? Clara looked Ariel in the eye, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. You can trust me. But remember, this is bigger than any one of us. You'll need to be careful who you trust from here on out. Ariel stood up, the paper still clenched tightly in her hand. The weight of the decision was heavy, but there was no turning back now. She had made up her mind. She would go to the meeting. And whatever happened next, she would face it head-on. The following night, the world felt eerily different. The evening air was thick with anticipation, and the usual sounds of Ivy Ridge had quieted into a strange silence that made Ariel's pulse race. The invitation in her pocket felt like a heavy weight, a symbol of the unknown she was about to walk into. Her fingers brushed against the edges of the paper as she stood outside the dimly lit building where the meeting was set to take place. The old math wing, a place she had passed by many times but never entered. It was an ancient part of the campus, rumored to be off-limits after hours. Her breath caught in her throat as she glanced around one last time, ensuring she was alone. The invitation had been simple, come to the old math wing at midnight. Trust no one but yourself. No name, no explanation. Just that. Ariel's heart hammered in her chest. Could she trust whoever had sent it? Could she trust Clara, who had handed it to her with such urgency? She had no answers, only the unsettling feeling that she was walking into something bigger than she could ever have imagined. Taking a deep breath, Ariel pushed open the heavy door to the old math wing. The inside was dark, with only the faint glow of overhead lights to guide her way. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the soft light, as if the place itself had been abandoned for years. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hallways, making the space feel even more isolated, almost as if the building were holding its breath. She continued down the hallway, her eyes scanning each classroom she passed. The doors were all shut tight, with no sign of life. But at the very end of the hall, one door was cracked open, a thin strip of light seeping out from the crack. The invitation had been clear, she was to meet whoever had called her here in that room. As Ariel approached the door, she could feel her anxiety rise, a knot tightening in her stomach. What awaited her on the other side? Who was waiting for her? With a deep breath, Ariel pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. Her eyes adjusted to the low light, and she immediately saw a figure standing near the chalkboard, silhouetted against the faint glow. The person was dressed in a black coat, their face obscured by shadows. Ariel couldn't make out any details except for the figure's posture, steady, confident, and calm. "You came," a deep voice said, breaking the silence. It was not a question, but a statement. Ariel hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, their face still hidden. "Someone who's been watching. Someone who knows what's going on at Ivy Ridge. And someone who knows what Professor Ellsworth has been doing." Ariel's heart skipped a beat. Ellsworth? This person knew about him. "Ellsworth?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The figure took another step forward, and Ariel could finally make out some of their features. It was a woman, her face partially visible in the dim light. Her expression was sharp, determined. "Professor Ellsworth is only the tip of the iceberg," the woman said, her voice steady. "Ivy Ridge is more than just a school. It's a breeding ground for power, control, and influence. There are forces at play here that go beyond what you can see. You've been targeted because of your potential, because of your abilities in mathematics. But that's not all." Ariel felt a chill run down her spine. She had always felt like there was something more beneath the surface of Ivy Ridge, something unsettling and hidden. But hearing it from this woman, someone who seemed to know so much about the inner workings of the school, made everything feel even more dangerous. "Who are you?" Ariel asked again, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you helping me?" The woman let out a small, bitter laugh. "I'm someone who wants to see Ivy Ridge burn. But not in the way you might think. I want to expose the corruption. I want to see the people who've been controlling this place for years held accountable. And I need your help to do that." Ariel's mind was spinning. Expose the corruption? Help? She didn't know whether she was being offered an opportunity for redemption or drawn deeper into something she had no way of understanding. "Why me?" Ariel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you think I can do? I'm just a student." The woman's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ariel could see a trace of empathy in her eyes. "You're not just a student, Ariel. You're something much more than that. You're a genius, a force to be reckoned with. And right now, you're one of the few who can take down the system that has kept Ivy Ridge in its grip for decades." Ariel swallowed hard, her throat dry. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. Could she truly take on Ivy Ridge and its powerful system? Could she fight back against someone as formidable as Professor Ellsworth? The woman stepped closer, pulling a small folder from the pocket of her coat and handing it to Ariel. "This contains everything you need to know. The people who've been involved in the corruption, the ones who've been pulling the strings behind the scenes, and how Ellsworth fits into it all. It's all in here. But be careful, these people don't take kindly to traitors." Ariel's hands shook as she took the folder. Her mind raced, but there was one question that kept repeating itself in her thoughts. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman's eyes darkened. Then you'll be forced to play their game, just like everyone else. And eventually, they'll crush you, just like they've crushed everyone else who's ever dared to stand up to them. The words hung in the air like a warning, and Ariel could feel her heart pounding in her chest. There was no going back now. She had to make a choice. The woman nodded, as if reading her mind. Take your time, but not too much. The clock is ticking, and the forces you're up against are relentless. Ariel looked down at the folder in her hands, her fingers trembling as she felt the weight of the moment. This was her turning point, her moment to decide whether she would fight for herself and the truth, or whether she would bow down to the power that controlled Ivy Ridge. I'll do it, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'll fight. I'll take them down. The woman's expression shifted, a look of approval crossing her face. Good. Then we'll have to work quickly. Time is of the essence. As the woman turned and walked toward the door, Ariel stood frozen in place, the folder still clutched tightly in her hands. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, but one thing was clear, Ariel had made her choice. She was no longer just a student at Ivy Ridge. She was now part of something much bigger. And there was no turning back. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion and tension. Ariel hadn't expected to feel the weight of her decision so heavily, but it was there, hanging over her like a dark cloud. Every time she looked at the folder the mysterious woman had given her, her hands would tremble, and the doubts would creep in. Could she really take down the system that had controlled Ivy Ridge for so long? Was she strong enough to face the darkness hidden within the walls of this prestigious institution? That night, after hours of reading through the contents of the folder, Ariel was no closer to finding an answer. The information inside was overwhelming. There were names, dates, and incidents, carefully documented evidence of the corruption and manipulation that had seeped into every corner of Ivy Ridge. The deeper she delved, the more horrified she became. Professors, students, even administrators, all had been complicit in a system designed to perpetuate inequality and maintain a chokehold on power. The details about Ellsworth were the most chilling. It wasn't just that he had been manipulating students for years. He was part of a much larger web, a web that had ensnared people at all levels of the institution. Ariel realized that this was far more than personal vendettas or petty power struggles. What she was up against was institutionalized corruption, carefully concealed beneath Ivy Ridge's prestigious reputation. As Ariel sat in her dorm room, reading through the dossier once more, she felt a gnawing sense of urgency. The woman who had given her the folder, Clara, had been right, time was running out. Every day that passed was another day that the system tightened its grip, another day that students like her were at risk of being crushed underfoot. The thought made her blood run cold. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Ariel jumped, startled out of her thoughts. She hadn't expected anyone tonight. The knocking came again, louder this time. Without thinking, she stood up and walked to the door, her heart racing. When she opened it, she was met with the last person she expected to see, Professor Ellsworth. His cold, calculating eyes fixed on hers as he stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation. Ariel froze, the folder still in her hand. Her mind raced. What was he doing here? She had never been in this position before, confronted face to face with the very man who had been the source of her nightmares for the past few weeks. You're looking a little pale, Miss Taylor, Ellsworth said smoothly, his voice dripping with false sweetness. I trust you're settling in well at Ivy Ridge. It's such a demanding place, isn't it? But that's what makes it so rewarding. Ariel could feel the tension rising between them, a crackling energy in the air. She wasn't sure what to say, but she knew one thing, she couldn't show any weakness now. She had to keep her composure, no matter how much her nerves threatened to betray her. I'm doing fine, Professor, Ariel said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. What brings you here? Ellsworth smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't, someone who had the upper hand. Oh, nothing much. Just a little check-in. After all, you're a bright student, Miss Taylor. I've been keeping an eye on you. We wouldn't want any distractions to interfere with your success, now would we? Ariel's heart skipped a beat. He knew. He had to know about the folder. There was no other explanation for this sudden visit. He was trying to intimidate her, to throw her off balance. But Ariel wasn't going to let him. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. I'm not sure what you mean, she said, her voice betraying nothing. I'm just focusing on my studies. Ellsworth stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Oh, I'm sure you are. But I've heard some rumors, Miss Taylor. Rumors about your extracurricular activities. It's said that you've been meeting with people who don't exactly have your best interests at heart. Ariel's breath caught in her throat. He was threatening her, but he was also offering her an ultimatum, as if this conversation was a test, one she had to pass if she hoped to survive at Ivy Ridge. I don't know what you're talking about, Ariel replied, her gaze fixed on him. I haven't been meeting anyone. Ellsworth's smile widened, but it was cold and unsettling. Really? Because I know more than you think. I know about the people you've been associating with. I know about the folder, Miss Taylor. The one that was given to you in the library. The one you've been reading. I know exactly what's in it. Ariel's heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Her mind screamed for a way out, for something she could say that would deflect his accusations, but nothing came to mind. She had been so careful, how could he have known? He continued, his voice low and menacing. You've made a dangerous choice, Miss Taylor. These people, whoever they are, they can't protect you. They will only lead you down a dark path, and you'll be nothing more than a pawn in a game you don't understand. You've seen how things work here, haven't you? You know how the system functions. But I'm offering you something else. I'm offering you a way to thrive. You don't have to fight the system, you can be part of it. You can be with me, instead of against me. The words hung in the air, offering Ariel a way out. A chance to join him, to align herself with power and privilege. It was tempting, so tempting, but she could feel the walls closing in around her. She couldn't take the easy way out. She couldn't let him win. No, Ariel said, her voice quiet but firm. I won't join you. And I won't back down. Ellsworth's expression shifted, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Very well. But remember, Miss Taylor. No one fights the system and wins. No one. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Ariel standing in the room, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. But something inside her had shifted. The fear that had once gripped her heart was now replaced with something stronger, a quiet determination. She was no longer just trying to survive at Ivy Ridge. She was ready to fight. And she would take down the system that had held so many under its thumb for so long. The next few days were filled with an undercurrent of tension that Ariel couldn't shake off. Professor Ellsworth's visit had left her unsettled, but it also made her resolve stronger. He had tried to intimidate her, to break her down, but she had stood her ground. That had been a small victory in itself. But now, she knew that the real battle was just beginning. The following week, Ariel noticed the subtle changes at Ivy Ridge. Whispers filled the hallways, students talking in hushed voices, exchanging looks when they thought no one was paying attention. The usual busy atmosphere seemed a little more strained, a little more guarded. It wasn't just the students either. Professors and staff members began to behave strangely around her, as if they knew she was a threat, as if they could sense that she was no longer just an ordinary student. The tension was palpable, and Ariel realized that she was now a part of something much larger than herself. In the midst of it all, Ariel began to notice Clara more. The woman had been a constant presence in the background since their first meeting. Though she hadn't made herself known again, Ariel felt her presence like a shadow that hovered just out of reach. It was clear that Clara had her own agenda, but Ariel wasn't sure whether she could trust her completely. Every time she tried to reach out to Clara for advice, the woman was always just a step ahead, leaving Ariel to wonder if Clara was truly on her side or if she had her own hidden motives. One afternoon, as Ariel was leaving her calculus class, she saw Clara standing near the door, looking almost impatient. Her eyes flicked to Ariel, and for a moment, it was as though the world around them disappeared. "Come with me," Clara said, her voice low and urgent. She didn't wait for a response, simply turning and walking toward the staircase. Ariel hesitated for a moment, but then, with no other choice, she followed. They walked in silence, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps in the empty hallways. Clara led her to a small, secluded room near the back of the building, a place that was rarely used by students, with walls lined with old bookshelves and thick curtains blocking out most of the light. It was dark, quiet, and isolated, a perfect place to have a conversation without anyone overhearing. Clara turned to her once they were inside, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You're making a dangerous move, Ariel. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Ariel's chest tightened. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm fighting back. I'm not going to let him get away with what he's done." Clara's gaze softened for a brief moment before hardening again. "This isn't just about him. This is bigger than Ellsworth. There are people, powerful people, who have been pulling the strings at Ivy Ridge for decades. People who will do anything to protect their interests. If you keep pushing, you'll be putting yourself in their sights." Ariel shook her head. "I've already put myself in their sights, haven't I? After Ellsworth visited me, after he threatened me. It's too late to back down now." Clara let out a soft sigh, her shoulders sagging as if she were carrying the weight of years of experience. "I'm not trying to discourage you, Ariel. I'm just trying to prepare you for what's coming. You don't know the full extent of what Ellsworth is capable of. He's just the beginning. The people behind him, they don't play by the same rules you do. They will fight dirty, and they will stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden." Ariel took a deep breath, her resolve solidifying. "I don't care. I can handle whatever they throw at me. I'm not afraid." Clara looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "You should be. Because this is just the start of something much darker. And soon, you won't be able to tell who your allies are and who your enemies are. Trust no one." Ariel felt the weight of Clara's words, but it only made her more determined. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't let herself be intimidated. Not by Ellsworth, not by the system, and certainly not by the faceless powers that lurked in the shadows of Ivy Ridge. Before she could respond, Clara turned and walked toward the door, glancing over her shoulder. "Keep your eyes open, Ariel. And remember, everything you think you know about this place might be a lie." With that, she was gone, leaving Ariel standing in the dimly lit room, her heart racing. The walls seemed to close in on her as she tried to process what Clara had said. She had already started down this path, and there was no turning back. The danger was real, but so was her resolve. She had no choice but to push forward. But Clara's words lingered in her mind, "Everything you think you know about this place might be a lie." Ariel had always thought she understood Ivy Ridge. It was just a school, a prestigious institution full of brilliant minds and opportunities. But now, she was beginning to see the cracks in the facade. What had once seemed like an idyllic setting was now a maze of deception, manipulation, and corruption. And she was in the middle of it. The next day, as Ariel sat in her room, poring over the documents in the folder, she began to realize the full extent of the corruption. The names in the dossier, professors, administrators, and even some of the wealthiest families in the country, were all linked in a web of secrecy that spanned decades. The system was rigged, and those at the top had used their power to keep everyone else in line. But what shook Ariel the most was the realization that she had known some of these people. She had worked with them, interacted with them, trusted them. Some were friends, others were colleagues. But now, she could see the truth. They were all part of the system. All of them had played a role in maintaining the illusion of fairness and opportunity. Her anger flared as she slammed the folder shut. This wasn't just about Professor Ellsworth anymore. It was about the entire institution, the lies they had fed to students like her, the promises they had broken, and the people they had crushed in the process. Ariel knew that she couldn't do this alone. She would need allies, people who were as determined as she was to expose the truth. But who could she trust? Clara's warning echoed in her mind, and for the first time, Ariel realized just how isolated she was. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. Every move had to be calculated, every word carefully chosen. One wrong step, and she could lose everything. As the days passed, Ariel felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. The closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. But there was no turning back now. Ivy Ridge was a battlefield, and Ariel was ready for the fight. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Have you ever felt completely outmatched by something bigger than yourself? How did you face it? Ariel couldn't sleep. The storm of thoughts swirling in her mind kept her awake late into the night, the weight of the choices before her pressing harder with each passing minute. She hadn't been prepared for this. She had come to Ivy Ridge believing in its prestige, its reputation for academic excellence. But now, it was clear, Ivy Ridge wasn't just a university, it was a fortress, and she had inadvertently stepped into its darkest corners. The only thing that kept her going was the thought of what might happen if she didn't act. If she let fear dictate her next move, she would be complicit in the very system that had exploited and manipulated students like her for years. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. In the days following her conversation with Clara, Ariel took extra precautions. She kept the folder hidden at all costs, and she made sure to never speak too freely about her suspicions. If anyone was watching her, she couldn't risk being seen as a threat, at least, not yet. She had to gather more information first. One afternoon, while sitting alone in the library, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. A group of students sat at a table nearby, talking in hushed voices. Ariel tried to ignore them, but one name stood out. "I heard Ellsworth is making a move on the board," one of the students whispered. "He's got connections. It's all part of the plan." The others nodded in agreement. Ariel felt her heart stop. Ellsworth? On the board? This couldn't be a coincidence. The pieces were falling into place, but Ariel didn't know exactly how or why. All she knew was that if Ellsworth was making a move for a position of greater power, then everything she had uncovered so far was only the tip of the iceberg. Her mind raced as she mentally catalogued everything she had learned. She knew she had to act, and quickly. That evening, she made her way to the one place where she could think in peace, the small, secluded room in the back of the library. It had become her sanctuary over the past few weeks, a place where she could go when she needed to think, when she needed to plan. It was quiet and hidden from the world, just the way she liked it. When she entered, she was surprised to find Clara sitting in the corner, staring at her phone. "Clara?" Ariel said, cautiously stepping into the room. Clara looked up, her eyes sharp, as if she had been waiting for her. "We need to talk," Clara said without preamble. "This isn't a game anymore. Things are escalating faster than I thought." Ariel's heart skipped a beat. Clara had always been the one giving her advice, but now, there was an urgency in her tone that made Ariel's stomach churn. "What's going on?" Clara stood and walked over to the bookshelf, pulling out a few thin files and laying them on the table in front of Ariel. "This is everything I could gather on the people behind Ellsworth. The board members, the donors, the administrators. These are the people who control the real power at Ivy Ridge." She paused, then continued, her voice low. "And they're not just manipulating students. They've been involved in something much darker." Ariel glanced down at the files, her pulse quickening as she flipped through the papers. The names and titles were all familiar to her, big names, the ones that had always been in the background of Ivy Ridge's glossy advertisements, the ones whose families had donated millions to the school. But now, their faces and names took on a new, sinister meaning. Each one was connected to Ellsworth in some way, either through direct financial backing, influence over the board, or covert dealings that were hidden behind Ivy Ridge's pristine image. The board, they're involved in something illegal, Ariel whispered, her voice barely audible as she looked up at Clara. Clara nodded gravely. The extent of it is staggering. They're laundering money, covering up financial scandals, even manipulating student admissions to ensure that certain families, those with the right connections, get preferential treatment. The whole system is corrupt from top to bottom. Ariel felt her head spin as she absorbed the magnitude of what Clara was saying. She had suspected that Ivy Ridge wasn't as perfect as it seemed, but this was beyond her worst fears. They weren't just keeping secrets, they were running a criminal operation. Clara leaned forward, her expression serious. We need to move fast. We can't let them get away with this. But you can't do this alone, Ariel. You need allies. Ariel shook her head, her thoughts racing. She had always been an independent person, but the weight of this battle was too much for her to carry alone. She had trusted no one, not even Clara, up until now. But the truth was undeniable, if she didn't find a way to expose this corruption, it would continue, quietly destroying students' futures, just as it had done to her. You're right, Ariel said, the words feeling heavy on her tongue. But who can I trust? Who can I turn to? Clara's eyes darkened as she looked at Ariel. You'll need to find people who've been affected by this. There are others who want to see change. They're out there, you just have to look closely enough. But you have to be careful. Not everyone is on your side. Ariel felt a surge of determination. It was time to take action. Time to make the first move. But she couldn't do it alone, and if Clara was right, it would require finding those hidden allies, people who had been victims of the system, just like her. As she left the library later that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had no idea how she was going to navigate the treacherous waters ahead, but one thing was certain, she was no longer going to play by the rules. Ivy Ridge had made its move. Now, it was her turn. Ariel's heart pounded in her chest as she sat at the back of the lecture hall, her eyes fixed on Professor Ellsworth. His sharp, calculating gaze swept over the students as he began his lecture, but for once, Ariel wasn't paying attention to the content of the class. She was watching him, closer than ever before. The past few days had been a whirlwind. After Clara's warning, Ariel had begun to dig deeper into the university's web of corruption. Every new piece of information she uncovered seemed to tie the board members, the faculty, and even some of the highest-profile students into a web of lies and deceit. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that Ivy Ridge wasn't just a place for academic excellence, it was a carefully constructed illusion. And behind that illusion was a system that was willing to destroy anyone who threatened its stability. But it wasn't just about the corruption anymore. It was about what happened when the truth began to leak out. Ariel had learned that someone powerful, had taken notice of her investigation. Late last night, her phone had buzzed with an anonymous message. The text was simple, but the weight of it nearly crushed her. We know what you're doing. Stop now. Or else. The words echoed in her mind as she sat in the classroom, her palms sweaty as she gripped the edge of her desk. This was it. This was the point of no return. She had always prided herself on her ability to stay calm under pressure, to think through the problems she faced with logic and precision. But this was different. For the first time in her life, Ariel felt a true sense of fear creeping into her chest. The stakes had never been higher. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore, she was fighting for her life. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice from the front of the room. Ariel. Ariel's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized she had been staring at Ellsworth until he addressed her directly. She looked up, trying to mask the panic she felt, but her breath caught in her throat. "Would you care to explain your thoughts on today's lesson?" Ellsworth asked, his eyes gleaming with a hint of amusement. The other students turned to look at her, and Ariel felt the weight of their gazes like 1,000 eyes on her. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaky as she walked to the front of the room. The chalkboard loomed before her like an ominous challenge, but she knew this was her moment. She had to rise to it. With a deep breath, Ariel glanced at the complex calculus problem written on the board. She could feel the tension mounting in the room as everyone waited for her response. She had studied the problem earlier and was confident that she knew the solution. It was a difficult one, but it was nothing compared to the challenges she had faced in her previous years. But as she began to write the solution on the board, she noticed something strange. Her hand trembled slightly. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her shoulders, and for a brief moment, the chalk in her hand felt impossibly heavy. She had to finish the equation, but something else loomed in her mind. Ellsworth's eyes. They never left her. His gaze was fixed, calculating, as though he could see right through her. The room seemed to fall into a hushed silence. Ariel's mind raced, but she refused to back down. She was not going to show weakness. She was not going to let him break her. She finished the equation on the board, her hand moving fluidly despite the fear coursing through her veins. When she stepped back, she took a moment to look at the problem. She had solved it, as she had known she would. But then, Ellsworth spoke again, his voice low and cold. "Impressive," he said, though there was no warmth in his words. "But we both know this isn't about math, is it, Ariel?" Ariel's heart sank. The way he said her name, so deliberately, made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had no doubt now that Ellsworth knew exactly what she had been doing. He wasn't just a professor, he was a part of the system she had been trying to expose. And he had already begun to make his move. Her hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her composure. "What do you mean?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, even though every fiber of her being was screaming to run. Ellsworth stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried across the room with terrifying clarity. "I'm warning you, Ariel," he said, his tone icy. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This isn't just some schoolyard dispute. You're going up against forces that have been in power for decades. And if you continue down this path, you will regret it." The weight of his words hit her like a blow. The implications of what he was saying, what he was threatening, were impossible to ignore. But Ariel wasn't about to let him intimidate her. Not now. Not when she was so close. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. Ellsworth smiled, though there was no kindness in it. "You should be." He turned on his heel and walked back to his desk, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Ariel remained standing at the front of the room, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Her mind was spinning, but she held firm, refusing to let the fear paralyze her. She had no choice now. The fight had begun in earnest. Later that evening, Ariel sat in her room, staring at the open folder of documents Clara had provided. The walls felt like they were closing in around her, but she forced herself to focus. She had been warned. But she had also been given a choice. To back down or to fight. And she wasn't about to back down. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. A message from Clara. "They're watching you. Stay sharp. I'll meet you tomorrow. Bring the documents." Ariel's fingers trembled as she typed a quick reply. "We're all in this together. I won't stop. Not now." As she hit send, she glanced at the darkening sky outside her window. The storm was coming. But Ariel knew one thing for sure, she would face it head-on. She was no longer just a student at Ivy Ridge. She was part of something much bigger now, a movement, a fight for truth, a fight for justice. And she would win. Ariel's world had become a series of whispers and shadows. Every step she took felt calculated, every glance she received from those around her scrutinized. The feeling that someone was watching her never left. In the days after her confrontation with Ellsworth, she found herself constantly looking over her shoulder. She had no choice but to push forward. There were too many lives at stake, too many truths buried beneath Ivy Ridge's polished veneer. It was late one night when the breakthrough came. Ariel had been holed up in her room, scanning through the documents Clara had provided. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, and the pages were starting to blur together. She had been looking for something, anything, that could break the whole case wide open. And then, just as she was about to give in to frustration, something caught her eye. A financial transaction, hidden between innocuous records, tucked away in the middle of a quarterly budget report. It didn't make sense at first. The amount was small in comparison to the rest of the figures in the report, but it was the recipient that caught her attention. Jared Ellsworth. Ariel's breath hitched in her chest. She leaned closer to the screen, her fingers trembling as she highlighted the name. There it was again, another trace of Ellsworth's influence, one she had not seen before. A simple transfer, just a few $1,000s, but its timing was too precise to be coincidence. The payment had occurred just days before a major donor event. That could mean only one thing: Ellsworth was involved in more than just the university's affairs. He had his hands in the pockets of something far more insidious. Ariel's mind raced as she pieced together the puzzle. This wasn't just about Ivy Ridge's corrupt admissions process. It was about something darker. Something that reached beyond the university's walls. But what? The door to her room creaked open, and Clara stepped inside, her face pale and tight with anxiety. Ariel quickly minimized the document on her laptop. "You're not going to believe this," Clara said, her voice low and urgent. "I just got a tip. Someone on the inside, told me Ellsworth has been meeting with the board members in secret. They're planning something big. Something that could change everything." Ariel's stomach twisted. She motioned for Clara to sit down. "What do you mean? What are they planning?" Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know the full details, but I heard that they're getting ready to move a large sum of money, probably to cover something up. And the worst part? The entire board is involved. Everyone. The very people who are supposed to be upholding the university's integrity are the ones who are hiding the truth. And Ellsworth is at the center of it all." Ariel felt the air in the room grow thick. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of their situation becoming suffocating. Everything Clara was saying only confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just about keeping the truth hidden, it was about a network of people willing to sacrifice anything to maintain their power, no matter the cost. She glanced back at her laptop screen, the documents now burning in her memory. The small transfer of funds she had discovered, the timing, the secrecy, it all pointed to something bigger than they could have imagined. The money, the meetings, the connections, it wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about control. "We have to get this information out," Ariel said, her voice tight with urgency. "We have to expose them, before they can do whatever it is they're planning." Clara nodded, but her expression was cautious. "I agree, but we need to be careful. If they're watching you already, then they're going to come after us once they realize we know too much. We have to act fast, but we also need to be smart." Ariel knew Clara was right. She had already pushed the envelope by investigating so deeply. If they were discovered now, they wouldn't just be expelled, they could end up facing criminal charges. There was no turning back once the truth was exposed. "We need to find a way to prove everything," Ariel said, determination filling her voice. "I can't just take these documents to the authorities without concrete proof. It's too risky." Clara stood up, her eyes narrowed with thought. "What if we could get someone on the inside? Someone who can access the bank records, maybe even record a meeting. If we can get a solid lead, something they can't deny, then we have them." Ariel's mind spun, weighing the options. They didn't have the resources or the connections to hack into the system themselves. They couldn't risk being caught trying to break into the university's files. But there had to be a way. There had to be someone who could help them. Who would have access to all that information? Ariel mused aloud. Someone in the administration. Someone who's close to Ellsworth, but not completely loyal. Clara's eyes flickered with realization. Dean Edwards. Ariel's heart skipped a beat. Dean Edwards was one of the few people on campus who might have the access they needed. He had been at Ivy Ridge for decades, and though he was considered a bit of an enigma, he had been one of the few administrators who spoke out about the university's need for change. He's been a thorn in Ellsworth's side for years, Clara continued. He's been pushing for more transparency, more accountability. If anyone would be willing to take a risk for the truth, it's him. Ariel nodded slowly, her mind racing. Dean Edwards wasn't perfect, but he was their best shot. They needed his help, and they needed it now. Let's do it, Ariel said. We'll approach him carefully. We need to make sure he trusts us before we ask him for help. If he's as opposed to Ellsworth as we think, he could be the key to exposing everything. Clara hesitated for a moment, her expression thoughtful. And if he doesn't want to get involved? Ariel bit her lip, considering the implications. Then we'll have to find another way. But we can't let this go. Too many lives are at stake. The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing. Ariel and Clara carefully crafted a way to approach Dean Edwards without drawing attention to themselves. They couldn't risk raising suspicion, not with Ellsworth's watchful eyes everywhere. But as the day of their meeting with the dean drew closer, Ariel felt a growing sense of unease. The closer they got to the truth, the more she felt like she was being pulled into a trap. She had been warned, and she knew the danger she was in. But now, there was no turning back. The web was closing in around her, and the only way out was to tear it apart from the inside. The air in the library was cool and quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound as Ariel and Clara sat huddled in a corner booth, nervously glancing at the clock. It was just past 7 p.m. The campus was practically deserted, the majority of students either holed up in their dorms or out at parties. Perfect timing, Ariel thought. She took a deep breath, her fingers tapping anxiously on the table. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every minute that passed seemed to increase her tension. She was about to approach one of the most powerful figures at Ivy Ridge, someone who could either be their greatest ally or their worst enemy. The door to the library creaked open, and Ariel's heart skipped. She looked up and saw the figure she had been waiting for, Dean Edwards. He was a tall man, graying at the temples, with a face that looked perpetually burdened by the weight of responsibility. Despite his serious demeanor, there was a kindness in his eyes, a stark contrast to the cold calculation of Professor Ellsworth. He spotted them immediately and gave a small, reassuring nod. Ariel stood, Clara following her lead. Dean Edwards, Ariel said, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. Thank you for meeting us. Of course, Miss Montgomery. Miss Clark, he said, his voice low and measured. He looked at them both with a mixture of curiosity and caution. I must admit, I didn't expect this meeting to be under such unusual circumstances. But I trust you both know how important discretion is right now. Ariel nodded, her mind racing. The tension was palpable. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the way his sharp eyes seemed to assess her every move, as though he was trying to figure out what they were really up to. She knew they had to be careful. One wrong word, and they could be back at square one, or worse. We know this isn't an easy request, sir, Clara said, her voice quieter than usual. But we need your help. Something big is going on at Ivy Ridge. Something that could ruin everything this university claims to stand for. The dean's brow furrowed, but his expression remained calm. I'm listening. Ariel took a deep breath and pressed forward. She had already rehearsed her words a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself feeling more nervous than she had anticipated. "We found evidence of corruption, Dean Edwards," Ariel said, choosing her words carefully. "It's tied directly to Professor Ellsworth and some of the university's highest donors. There's been illegal financial activity, bribery, kickbacks, and an extensive cover-up." The dean's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in his eyes, an almost imperceptible sign that he wasn't entirely surprised. His lips pressed into a thin line, as though he were weighing the implications of their words. "I see," he said slowly. "And what exactly do you want from me?" Ariel leaned forward, her voice resolute. "We need access to the university's financial records, especially those connected to the major donors and any payments related to Professor Ellsworth. We believe that with the right documentation, we can prove that this corruption runs deep. But we can't do it alone." Dean Edwards remained silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Ariel and Clara. He was calculating, weighing the risks. Ariel could see the internal struggle written on his face. She knew this wasn't an easy choice for him. If he helped them, his career, his life at Ivy Ridge, could be over. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "You're asking me to betray everything I've worked for, to expose not only Professor Ellsworth, but the entire institution I've devoted my career to." Clara nodded. "We understand the weight of that, sir. But the truth is bigger than any one of us. This university is built on a lie, and we can't just stand by and let it destroy people's lives." The dean's eyes narrowed, and he sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of his decision had already started to press down on him. He rubbed his hand over his face and looked down at the table. "I've known for a long time that something wasn't right here," he admitted, his voice low. "I've seen the way the board operates, how they twist the rules to maintain their power, how they silence those who get too close to the truth. I've tried to fight it in my own way, but I'm only one man. They have the leverage, the money, and the influence." Ariel's heart sank. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing the dean admit how deep the corruption went made her stomach churn. "So you've seen it too," Ariel said softly. "You know what's happening." He nodded slowly. "I've seen it, but I've never been able to stop it. Until now." Ariel's pulse quickened. She could feel the tide beginning to shift. "So you'll help us?" Dean Edwards studied them both carefully, his eyes lingering on Ariel for a moment longer. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. "Yes. I'll help you. But we have to be extremely careful. If they catch wind of what we're doing, everything we've worked for will be destroyed." Ariel and Clara exchanged a quick glance, both of them feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. This was the moment they had been waiting for. With the dean's help, they could get the proof they needed to take down Ellsworth and the corrupt system at Ivy Ridge. But they also knew that things were about to get a lot more dangerous. "We'll be careful," Ariel said, her voice firm. "We'll make sure no one knows what we're doing. But we need to act quickly." Dean Edwards stood up, his expression serious. "I'll get you the documents you need. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But if you're determined to expose the truth, then I'll stand with you." The meeting was over far too soon. As they walked out of the library, the weight of what had just happened began to settle in. Ariel felt the rush of adrenaline begin to fade, leaving her exhausted, but also energized. They had taken a huge step forward. But with it came a new, greater risk. The path ahead was now fraught with danger. "Do you think we can trust him?" Clara asked, her voice quiet as they walked through the empty campus. Ariel glanced at her, her mind racing. "I think we have no choice but to trust him. He knows what's at stake. If anyone can help us, it's him." Clara nodded, though the concern was still evident in her eyes. "Just be careful. Trusting the wrong people could be our downfall." Ariel felt the weight of Clara's words. She knew they had to tread carefully. But they couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to the truth. As they parted ways that night, Ariel couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of something much bigger than they had anticipated. The storm was coming, and it was going to hit hard. But Ariel was ready. She had already fought too hard to back down now. The days after meeting Dean Edwards felt like a blur. Ariel and Clara worked tirelessly, planning their next moves and waiting for the documents that would either validate their fears or give them the answers they needed. They tried to keep their activities under wraps, meeting in quiet, inconspicuous locations around campus, always vigilant. The weight of their secret felt heavy, like a storm cloud that loomed just beyond the horizon. Ariel's nerves were on edge, and the constant tension seemed to invade every moment of her day. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was as though the walls of Ivy Ridge were closing in around her, suffocating her with every turn. She found herself checking her surroundings more often than usual, looking for any sign of surveillance. Had Ellsworth caught wind of their investigation? Or was it just her paranoia? One evening, as she sat in the dimly lit library, flipping through the paperwork Dean Edwards had provided, Clara texted her, "We need to meet. Now." Ariel's heart skipped a beat. Something had happened. She grabbed her bag and quickly made her way to the back door of the library, where Clara was waiting. Her friend's face was pale, her expression tight with worry. "Clara, what's going on?" Ariel asked, voice trembling slightly with concern. Clara glanced over her shoulder before pulling Ariel into the shadows behind the building. "I heard something. Ellsworth's been talking to someone in the administration. Someone close. And I don't think it's just about donations anymore. They're planning something huge. Something we might not be able to stop." Ariel's mind raced. "What do you mean? What's he planning?" Clara hesitated, her brow furrowed with concern. "I overheard a conversation in the student center. It was brief, but I'm certain it had to do with the university's endowment funds. Ellsworth's been pushing for an emergency budget allocation, but I don't think it's for anything legitimate. There's too much secrecy surrounding it." Ariel felt a chill run down her spine. Emergency budget allocation? That's a huge amount of money. What would they be doing with it? Clara shook her head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it sounds like they're preparing for something big. Something that could shake the foundation of the university itself. And we're running out of time." Ariel took a deep breath. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make any sense. Why would Ellsworth push for such a drastic move? Could it be related to the financial irregularities they had found? Was he covering up something much bigger than just admissions fraud? "We need to figure out what he's doing," Ariel said, her voice steady. "And we need to do it fast. We can't wait for Dean Edwards anymore. He's already risking everything by helping us. If we're going to expose Ellsworth, we need solid proof." Clara nodded, her face grim. "I agree. But we can't go in blind. We need to find out exactly what's going on behind closed doors. We need to get access to those meetings, those documents. Everything." Ariel's mind began to whirl with ideas. She needed something concrete, something they could hold on to before Ellsworth's plans came to fruition. But getting that evidence was going to be dangerous. They had to be smarter than ever, careful not to reveal too much to anyone. That night, Ariel couldn't sleep. The shadows of Ivy Ridge felt darker than ever, and the weight of the impending storm pressed on her chest. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to think of a way to expose Ellsworth and the others without putting herself and Clara in even more danger. The thought of facing the wrath of someone like Ellsworth, someone who had already proven how ruthless he could be, terrified her. But she couldn't stop. She had come too far. At the crack of dawn, Ariel received another message, this one from Dean Edwards. It was short, urgent, "The meeting is tomorrow. Be ready." Ariel stared at the message, her heart racing. It was happening. Dean Edwards was going to provide them with the final piece of the puzzle. The next day, Ariel and Clara met in a small, nondescript cafe near the campus. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the empty tables, and the air was still cool with the remnants of early morning mist. "I'm nervous," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper as they sat in a corner booth. "What if they catch on? What if this is the end?" Ariel reached across the table and gave Clara's hand a reassuring squeeze. "We've come this far. We have to see it through. We can't back down now. Not after everything we've learned." Clara looked at her, her eyes filled with concern. "But what if we're making a mistake? What if Ellsworth finds out and tries to silence us?" Ariel felt the weight of her words sink in. She had thought about that possibility countless times. Ellsworth was dangerous, and anyone who got too close to the truth was at risk. But she couldn't live with herself if she didn't at least try. "I know it's scary. But the truth is bigger than us," Ariel said. "And we can't let him win." They spent the next few hours carefully planning their next steps. They couldn't just walk into Dean Edwards's office and demand the documents. They needed a more subtle approach, something that wouldn't alert anyone to their intentions. They were working against the clock, and every minute counted. That afternoon, Ariel received a call from Dean Edwards. His voice was steady, but she could hear the tension beneath the surface. "They're meeting tomorrow," he said. "It's time. You'll get what you need. But remember, no one can know. If we're caught, it's over." Ariel swallowed hard, her stomach a mass of nerves. This was it. The moment they had been working toward for weeks. The moment that could either destroy everything or bring it all crashing down. "We're ready," Ariel said. "We'll be there." The next morning, she and Clara dressed in their best outfits, plain enough to blend in, but professional enough to give the impression of a normal meeting. Ariel's pulse quickened as they approached the building where the meeting was taking place. This was the moment they had waited for. And it was also the moment they had to be the most careful. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the administrative building, casting long beams of light across the polished floors. Ariel's heart raced as she and Clara walked into the building, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The usual buzz of campus life was absent this early in the day, leaving only the weight of their mission to hang in the air. "Are you sure about this?" Clara whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the hall. "I mean, what if someone sees us? What if we get caught?" Ariel gave her a quick, reassuring glance. "We can't turn back now. We've come too far." The meeting with Dean Edwards was set for 10 a.m., but Ariel couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Every corner of the building felt like it was watching them. The closer they got to the dean's office, the more Ariel felt the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. "Remember," she said, her voice low, "we just need the documents. Get in, get out. No mistakes." Clara nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. They both knew the gravity of what they were about to do. One wrong move, and their entire plan could be exposed, along with their careers, their reputations, and their safety. When they reached the dean's office, the door was slightly ajar, and they could hear voices inside. Ariel's pulse quickened. Dean Edwards had told them to wait until he called them in, but hearing other voices made her nervous. Who else was in there? Was Ellsworth already in the building? "Stay calm," Ariel whispered to Clara. "We're not alone in this. We'll get through this together." They stood in the hallway, waiting, their breath shallow and quick. After a few minutes, the door swung open, and Dean Edwards appeared, looking as calm and composed as ever, though his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. "Come in," he said, his voice barely audible. He quickly glanced around to ensure no one else was nearby. "We don't have much time." Ariel and Clara followed him inside. The office was neat and understated, much like the dean himself. A large mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, covered with stacks of papers, books, and a computer that had been left untouched for a while. The atmosphere was strangely tense, and Ariel could tell Dean Edwards was trying his best to keep up a facade of normalcy. He didn't want anyone to know that he was helping them. "Sit down," he gestured, motioning to 2 chairs on the opposite side of his desk. "I've got the documents you asked for. But you need to be careful. Things are moving fast, and we're running out of time." Ariel nodded, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her body, and the reality of the situation started to hit her harder than before. This was it. This was the moment they would either succeed or fail. "Thank you," she said quietly, trying to steady her nerves. "We'll be careful. We just need to know everything." Dean Edwards opened a drawer on the left side of his desk, carefully pulling out a manila folder. He handed it over to Ariel, his hands shaking slightly. "This is the file on Ellsworth's activities," he said in a low voice. "Everything you need is in here, proof of the illegal transactions, evidence of the kickbacks, and a list of the donors involved. I've also included a few documents that tie the administration to some of the more questionable financial activities. If you're going to take him down, this is your ammunition." Ariel took the folder with trembling hands, careful not to let her emotions show. She opened it slowly, scanning through the documents inside. There were spreadsheets, emails, and payment records, everything they needed to expose the network of corruption that had been festering in the university for years. This is huge," Clara whispered, her eyes wide. "We could bring him down with this." Ariel glanced up at Dean Edwards, who was watching them closely. "What's the catch?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "Why are you helping us?" Dean Edwards looked away for a moment, his gaze distant. "I've spent years trying to ignore what's been happening. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that I was just one person. But when I saw what Ellsworth was capable of, when I realized how deep this went, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Ariel felt a pang of gratitude and empathy for the dean. He was risking everything, his career, his future, even his safety, just to do the right thing. "There's more," Dean Edwards continued, his voice lower now. "Ellsworth has some powerful allies, and they're not going to let this go without a fight. If you plan to use this evidence, you'll have to move quickly. And don't trust anyone outside of this room, not yet." Ariel nodded. "We won't." "Thank you, Dean. We'll make sure this all comes to light." Dean Edwards gave them a solemn look. "Just remember, once the cat's out of the bag, there's no going back. You'll be targets. The university won't go down without a fight." As Ariel and Clara stood up to leave, the door creaked open again, and the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The tension in the room spiked as they turned to face the door. For a moment, Ariel thought they had been caught. But it was only a student, a young woman, likely one of the dean's assistants, coming to deliver a message. The assistant quickly glanced at Ariel and Clara, then back at the dean. "Professor Ellsworth is here to see you, sir," she said, her tone neutral, though her eyes flickered with a hint of unease. Ariel froze, her heart racing. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a warning. Ellsworth was already here. He was closing in on them. Dean Edwards' expression darkened. He quickly closed the manila folder and shoved it into a drawer. "You need to go. Now. I'll cover for you." Ariel and Clara exchanged a quick glance. They didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed the folder and bolted for the door, not daring to look back. As they hurried down the hallway, the sounds of Ellsworth's voice could be heard in the distance. His cold, calculating tone sent a chill down Ariel's spine. She had a feeling that this meeting was just the beginning. The danger was only escalating. Once they were safely outside the building, Clara looked at Ariel, her face pale. "Do you think he knows?" "I don't know," Ariel said, her voice shaky. "But we need to move fast. We have what we need. Now we just have to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." The storm had finally broken, and they were at the eye of it. The path ahead was uncertain, and the danger was real. But they couldn't stop now. The adrenaline from their narrow escape buzzed in Ariel's veins as she and Clara walked quickly down the deserted campus paths, the weight of the manila folder heavy in Ariel's bag. They barely exchanged words, both lost in their thoughts, and yet the silence between them felt charged, like the calm before the storm. The risk had just increased tenfold, and they knew that every move they made from here on out had to be perfect. As they made their way to their usual meeting spot, an old, quiet cafe tucked away in a corner of campus, Ariel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. The danger was real now. They had evidence, proof of Ellsworth's corruption, but the cost of exposing it felt like a steep, perilous climb. The university, its administration, and its powerful allies would stop at nothing to silence them. They were no longer just students, they were threats. The door to the cafe chimed as they entered, the familiar warmth of the space offering a brief moment of comfort. They slid into a corner booth, their eyes scanning the room instinctively, checking for anyone who might be watching. It was as if they were unable to trust anything around them anymore. Even the safe spaces they once took for granted seemed to be filled with unseen dangers. Clara was the first to break the silence, her voice shaking. "Ariel, I'm scared. We have the documents, but now, what do we do with them? If we go public, if we tell anyone, this could get really ugly." Ariel looked down at the table, her hands clutching the folder with trembling fingers. The weight of the information inside felt even heavier now. "I know," she whispered. "I've been thinking about it non-stop since we left the dean's office. But this is what we've been working for. This is why we've risked everything." Clara shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "But we're not just going up against Ellsworth anymore. We're going up against the entire system. The university has power, real power. And they will fight back. Do we even have enough to bring them down?" Ariel's heart sank. She had always known the stakes were high, but hearing Clara voice the full weight of the danger made it all too real. They weren't just taking down a corrupt professor. They were potentially bringing down the entire structure of the university, a powerhouse that had shaped so many lives for generations. "I don't know," Ariel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we can't let Ellsworth win. We can't let him get away with this." Clara stared at her, her gaze flickering between the folder and Ariel's face. There was a long pause, a moment where both of them seemed to process the enormity of what they were about to do. Finally, Clara sighed, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I guess you're right. We can't just sit back and hope for someone else to fix this. We've come too far. We have the proof. If we expose it, maybe, just maybe, we can make a difference." Ariel nodded, though she still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt professor anymore. This was about revealing an entire system of lies, deceit, and manipulation that ran so deep, it threatened to swallow them whole. "We have to be careful," Ariel said, her voice steady, though her insides were churning with nerves. "We'll need to be strategic. We can't just release everything all at once. We need to make sure we have support, people who can back us up." Clara's eyes narrowed with determination. "We'll go to the press. We'll reach out to investigative journalists, to trusted people who can help us get the story out there. But we can't do it alone." The thought of going public made Ariel's stomach churn, but Clara was right. They couldn't risk carrying the weight of this burden by themselves. They needed to find allies, people who understood the gravity of the situation and who had the power to amplify their voices. "Okay," Ariel said, her voice firm now. "We'll start reaching out. We can't wait any longer." But just as they were starting to formulate their plan, a figure appeared in the doorway of the cafe, his face unmistakable even from a distance. Dean Edwards. His expression was tense, but he didn't look as though he was being followed. Still, the sight of him made Ariel's heart race. He spotted them almost immediately, his eyes scanning the room before locking on Ariel and Clara. Without a word, he walked over to their booth and sat down across from them, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You shouldn't be here," he said urgently. "Ellsworth is looking for you. He's got people watching every move you make." Ariel's pulse spiked at the mention of Ellsworth's name. "What do you mean? How does he know we're here?" Dean Edwards glanced around nervously, his eyes darting toward the door. "I don't know how, but he's been on high alert since you two left his office. He's putting the pressure on every department, trying to trace your steps. If he finds out you're planning to go public with what you have." Clara leaned forward, her voice tight with fear. "What happens then?" Dean Edwards looked them both in the eyes. "Then everything you've worked for will be destroyed. Ellsworth won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in his way. He's already pulled strings to shut down investigations in the past. If you push forward, he'll make sure you're silenced. Permanently." Ariel's heart dropped. The stakes had never been higher, but there was no turning back now. She had to decide whether they would take the plunge and risk everything, or whether they would let fear dictate their future. Clara placed a hand on Ariel's, squeezing it gently. "We have no choice, do we?" Ariel shook her head slowly, her gaze meeting Clara's with a mixture of determination and fear. "No. We don't. But we have to do it on our terms. We'll expose the truth, and we'll make sure they can't stop us." Dean Edwards looked between the two of them, his eyes filled with caution. "I'm telling you, be careful. If you're going to do this, you need to make sure you have everything lined up. You need allies. People who will fight this battle with you." Ariel nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She had come this far. She couldn't stop now. The storm was coming, and Ariel knew they were standing right at the eye of it. But she also knew one thing for sure, they were ready to face whatever it was that lay ahead. Together. The next few days passed in a blur, a whirlwind of plans, meetings, and moments of unrelenting tension. Ariel felt as though she was walking through a fog, her mind consumed by the magnitude of what they were about to do. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and every move they made had to be calculated. One misstep, one slip-up, and everything they had worked for would crumble. She sat at her desk in the small corner of the library, staring down at the manila folder. The documents inside were heavy with the weight of truth, but Ariel could feel the storm swirling around her as she carefully reviewed them once again. She had memorized every page, every detail, but something about it still unsettled her. The file was the key to everything, the evidence that could expose Ellsworth for the manipulative, corrupt figure he truly was, but it was also the thing that could ruin their lives if they were caught. Clara had been equally on edge, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from trusted contacts, but there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty. They had the right evidence. They had the right allies. But how could they ensure that their fight didn't end with them being silenced forever? Ariel rubbed her eyes, exhausted from the sleepless nights and endless strategizing. She felt like she hadn't truly rested in days, her mind never truly at ease. With every passing hour, the risk of exposure grew, and she knew they couldn't wait forever. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear now that they needed to act fast before it was too late. It was a chilly morning when they received a message that would change everything. Clara's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from one of their contacts. Ariel's heart skipped a beat when she saw the name, Alex, an investigative journalist who had been helping them connect with the right people on the outside. Clara quickly opened the message and read it aloud, her voice trembling with the weight of what it meant. Ellsworth's lawyers are already mobilizing. They've found out about the leak. They're coming after us. Ariel's blood ran cold as the reality of the situation hit her. They were running out of time. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara's face was pale as she looked up from the phone. It means they know we're coming for them. They'll try to discredit us, twist the narrative, and make us look like the villains. If we don't move quickly, they'll turn the public against us before we even have a chance to make our case. Ariel's mind raced. There was no way out of this. If they didn't act now, they would lose their opportunity. The system was already rigged to protect people like Ellsworth, and the longer they waited, the less power they had to fight back. "We need to go public," Ariel said, her voice steady, though every fiber of her being screamed for caution. "We can't wait anymore. If we do this right, we can't be stopped." Clara nodded, though she still seemed unsure. "But how do we do it? How do we make sure we get the story out without it getting buried?" Ariel's mind was working overtime, pulling together the pieces of the plan they had crafted. They needed to take this directly to the media, to people who could not only expose Ellsworth but would be able to get the truth out to the world. It was no longer just about making an impact on their campus, it was about creating a movement. "We need to leak the story to the right outlets," Ariel said, more to herself than to Clara. "People with a track record of exposing corruption. We have to make sure the press can't ignore us. And we need to do it fast." Clara nodded in agreement, but there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. "What if we're too late? What if Ellsworth already has the upper hand?" Ariel shook her head. "We can't think like that. We have the evidence. We have the support. And most importantly, we have the truth on our side." With a renewed sense of purpose, Ariel grabbed the folder and stood up from her desk. There was no turning back. They were on the edge of something huge, something dangerous, but it was also their only chance to take Ellsworth down and expose the corruption within the university. "We do this together," Ariel said firmly. "We're in this fight, and we're not backing down." That afternoon, Ariel and Clara met with Alex in a quiet, secluded cafe on the outskirts of campus, away from prying eyes. Alex, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for tackling high-profile corruption cases, looked as calm and composed as ever as he sat down across from them. "I've been following your progress," Alex said, his voice low but confident. "You've got the right evidence, but we need to be strategic about how we release it. Ellsworth has powerful connections, and he won't go down without a fight. The moment we go public, we need to be ready for everything he'll throw at us." Ariel nodded. She had no illusions about the magnitude of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about exposing a single corrupt professor, it was about taking down an entire network of deceit and manipulation that ran through the heart of the university system. And they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. "We need your help," Clara said, her voice tight with anxiety. "You've been through this before. How do we make sure the story gets out and sticks? How do we protect ourselves once the media gets involved?" Alex leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "The key is getting the right people involved. We'll start with the big outlets, ones that have a history of holding institutions accountable. But you need to be prepared for the fallout. Once the story breaks, Ellsworth's camp will come after you. You'll need to have a solid defense, lawyers, PR experts, allies who can protect you." Ariel swallowed hard, the weight of Alex's words sinking in. She had known that this fight would be difficult, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it feel more real than ever. They were about to tear down something that had been built over decades. The road ahead would be treacherous, but there was no turning back. "We're ready," Ariel said, though her voice faltered slightly. "We have to be." Alex studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll get to work on reaching out to the right contacts. We'll set the stage for the leak. You two need to stay off the radar. No more meetings in public, no more leaving a trail. From here on out, it's all about keeping things tight and secure." With that, the meeting ended, and Ariel and Clara walked out of the cafe, their hearts heavy with anticipation. They had crossed the point of no return. There was no going back now. They were about to unleash a storm, one that would change their lives forever. As they walked across campus, the weight of their decision hung over them, but there was something else, too, a fierce sense of determination. They had come this far. They weren't backing down now. The days following their meeting with Alex felt like a blur, an intense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Ariel and Clara were constantly on edge, moving in silence and secrecy, their every step fraught with the knowledge that their lives had changed forever. They had no way of knowing exactly when it would happen, but the story they'd worked so hard to expose was about to break wide open. Ariel spent every moment she could in her apartment, poring over the documents, revisiting every detail of the case. She and Clara had made their choice, and there was no turning back. The phone calls and emails from Alex came fast and furious, as he coordinated with his network of journalists and lawyers, preparing for the release of the story. In the midst of all the chaos, a quiet stillness settled over Ariel. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but a sort of resigned calm that comes when you know you're standing on the precipice of something monumental. She was no longer afraid. Fear had been replaced by a certainty, an understanding that this was their moment. If they were going to succeed, it was now or never. It was just after sunset when the message arrived. Ariel's phone buzzed with a single line of text from Alex: "It's happening. The story goes live in 15 minutes. The weight of those words felt like an earthquake tremor, sending a ripple of anxiety and anticipation through her body. It was the moment they'd been working toward for weeks, months even. The culmination of everything. "Clara," Ariel whispered as she grabbed her friend's arm, "it's happening." Clara looked at her, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. "Are we ready?" Ariel nodded. "We've been ready." They sat in silence for a moment, as if each of them was processing the gravity of what was about to unfold. The calm before the storm had reached its peak. Then, almost as though it were scripted, Ariel's phone chimed again. This time, it was a notification from a news outlet. "Breaking news, University of Edgewood professor exposed in massive corruption scandal." Ariel's stomach dropped. She stared at the screen, seeing the first few lines of the article that detailed Ellsworth's fraudulent activities, his manipulation of student grades, the illegal funding he'd accepted, and his involvement in a larger network of academic dishonesty. It was all there, every detail they had uncovered. The story had officially gone live. Ariel felt her pulse quicken as she refreshed the page, watching the headlines spread across news sites, social media, and university forums. The world was starting to take notice. The backlash was already beginning, as users in the comments section of the article started sharing their outrage. The narrative was taking shape, and it was one they had worked tirelessly to craft. Ellsworth, the respected professor, now revealed as a fraud and a criminal. Within minutes, the phone rang. It was Alex. "It's out," Alex's voice was calm but with an undercurrent of urgency. "The story's everywhere now. Ellsworth is already denying everything, and his lawyers are circling. But the public outcry is massive. You did it. You're changing everything." Ariel felt a mix of pride and fear. "What happens next?" "Next?" Alex asked with a chuckle. "Now the real fight begins. You're going to face some serious pushback. Ellsworth won't just lie down. But you've got the momentum on your side. We'll need to keep pushing, keep gathering support. The media's not going to let this one go, and neither will the public." As Alex spoke, Ariel felt her shoulders relax for the first time in what felt like forever. The fight was far from over, but they had won the first round. The truth had been unleashed, and there was no putting it back in the bottle. The aftermath was as chaotic as it was overwhelming. News outlets from across the country picked up the story, and soon the investigation into Ellsworth expanded beyond the confines of Edgewood University. Journalists and law enforcement began digging deeper into the university's financial records, and soon, it was revealed that Ellsworth wasn't the only one involved. A sprawling network of faculty members and administrators was implicated in the scandal, their corrupt practices running deeper than anyone had realized. Ariel and Clara stayed in close contact with Alex, coordinating their next steps as they navigated the dangerous waters of public scrutiny. They had the truth on their side, but they also had to contend with the threats and smear campaigns that Ellsworth's camp was launching against them. The university tried to discredit them, painting them as disgruntled students with an axe to grind, but the public wasn't buying it. "People want to know the truth," Clara said one night, as they sat in Ariel's apartment, scrolling through the latest developments on their laptops. "They want to see the system held accountable. I think we might actually be doing this." Ariel nodded, her mind still processing everything that had happened. "But we can't stop now. We have to keep fighting." And they did. They met with more journalists, provided further evidence, and kept pushing the narrative forward. The truth was taking on a life of its own, growing louder with each passing day. As the investigation progressed, more and more students came forward, sharing their stories of how Ellsworth had manipulated grades, coerced them into unethical behavior, and even threatened them if they didn't comply with his demands. The web of corruption was unraveling, and it seemed that nothing could stop it. Months passed, and the university was forced to make dramatic changes. Ellsworth was fired, and a number of other faculty members were implicated in the scandal. Lawsuits were filed, and investigations into the university's financial dealings continued for years. The scandal made national headlines, and Ariel and Clara became symbols of resistance, of the power of truth and the courage to speak up, no matter the cost. But for Ariel, the most profound change wasn't in the headlines or the courtroom battles. It was in herself. She had gone from a quiet student, unsure of her place in the world, to someone who had helped bring down a corrupt system. She had learned that the truth, no matter how dangerous, would always find its way into the light. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking out at the campus in the distance. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the trees and buildings. In a way, it felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "What now?" Clara asked from the doorway, her voice carrying the weight of the months they'd spent fighting for justice. "What comes next?" Ariel smiled faintly, her eyes distant as she thought about everything they had endured. "I don't know. But we've made a difference. We've shown that one person, one voice, can change everything. And that's worth everything." As the final pieces of the puzzle came together, Ariel realized something important. The battle for justice had been long and hard, but in the end, it had been worth it. They had stood up to the most powerful forces on their campus and prevailed, proving that the truth could never be silenced, not when it had the power to set people free. And with that, Ariel knew the real work was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?